Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting. Baha'u'llah always writes to Christians using Christian terminology. Ye are the stars of the heaven of my knowledge. My mercy desireth not that ye should fall upon the earth. This is a reference to a prediction of Jesus in the book of John, just before his crucifixion, where he talks about when he would come back, the stars would fall upon the earth. So he's explaining to them that you, as the leaders, the Christian leaders, are the stars of the heaven of my knowledge, and my mercy desireth that ye, not that ye should fall upon the earth. Although, of course, Baha'u'llah is quite aware that that is the prophecy. They would fall on the earth. My justice, however, declareth, this is that which the Son of Jesus hath decreed. The Son hath decreed. This is that which the Son hath decreed. And whatsoever hath proceeded out of his blameless, his truth-speaking, trustworthy mouth can never be altered. I agree. I mean, that's when you read that section of the book of John, the latter part of the book of John, where he's talking to the disciples in Jerusalem about the time of the end, this language will just jump out at you. Any comments on this further? And again, the stars of the heaven of knowledge have fallen. This is what the Spirit prophesied. And then addressing the priest, the people who were at the local level, he leave the bells, come forth from your churches. And he says the whole world is alive with the word of his coming. So let the breeze of God awaken you. Verily it hath wafted over the world. So I found this very interesting. Verily it hath wafted over the world. So the breeze of the knowledge of Baha'u'llah's coming has the whole world had experienced this, at least in some mystical, spiritual way. And then again, O concourse of priests, the day of reckoning hath appeared, because the Baha'is, I mean, the Christians speak of this, the second coming as the day of reckoning. And this is when the sheep are going to be separated from the goats, the believers from the unbelievers. He is the one whom ye were promised in the books of God, the holy, the almighty, the all praise. How long will ye wander in the wilderness of heedlessness and superstition? This is harking back to the Jews wandering 40 years in the wilderness. And then turn your hearts in the direction of your Lord. And then it's really interesting how specific he is in this one, where he's addressing monks. Monks, of course, are different from priests. These are not people who are there to serve others. They are there to develop themselves spiritually, and to do so by secluding themselves, removing themselves from the world so that they can concentrate all of their time and efforts into being spiritual by having long prayers and reading of scripture and so forth. And this was not part of the first several hundred years of the Christian church. It developed about 300 or 400 years after Jesus. And it involved people going in and living in caves in the Holy Land. And of course, other Christians had to come and bring them food, even if they're just sitting there in a cave praying all day. So anyway, what is he saying? He says, seclude not yourselves in churches and cloisters. Come forth and occupy yourselves with that which will profit your souls and souls of men. Seclude yourselves in the stronghold of my love. This is a befitting seclusion. He that shutteth himself up in a house is indeed as one dead. So sitting around all day praying, you may as well be dead. This is also what the story of Elijah is about. It behooveth, in the Old Testament, it behooveth man to show forth that which will profit all created things. He that bringeth forth no fruit is fit for the fire. And that's almost a direct quote of Jesus. He that bringeth forth no fruit is fit for the fire. Enter ye into wedlock, that after you someone may fill your place. We have forbidden you perfidious acts, not that which will demonstrate fidelity. So chastity, having no sex at all, is not what is wanted. It's sex within marriage. So having sex outside of marriage is, yes, that's forbidden, but having it within marriage is fine and dandy. So you can have children. Have ye clung to the standards fixed by your own selves and cast the standards of God behind your back? Fear God and be not of the foolish. I mean, the monasteries by the time of Baha'u'llah had all kinds of rules and so forth. You know, you couldn't talk in some monasteries, vows of silence and all this sort of stuff. But the standards of God had been ignored. He that wedded not found no place wherein to dwell or lay his head, by reason of that which the hands of the treacherous had wrought. His sanctity consisteth not in that which ye believe or fancy, but rather in the things we possess. So it's very interesting. He is first of all confirming, unlike some of the speculation going on today that Jesus married Mary Magdalene, that he never wedded. And he didn't have a home. He didn't have a normal home. In fact, he says that in the New Testament. He says, birds have the fields and the foxes have their burrows, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And he says this is because of the treacherous. He had to be on the move. And that we don't glorify Jesus and consider him divine because he didn't have a home and he didn't get married. It's because of his spiritual attributes and his teachings. Those other two aspects of his life were unimportant. It's also very interesting that Jesus, because he was considered a bastard, because his father was unknown, his biological father was unknown, he would have found it almost impossible to marry within Orthodox Judaism at that time. So he might not have been able to marry in the world that he inhabited in Nazareth. And then again, talking to the monks, more of the same. Bethlehem is astir with the breeze of God. O Bethlehem, this light hath risen in the Orient and traveled toward the Occident until it reaches thee in the evening of its life. The evening of his life is Baha'u'llah's life when he's come toward to Akka. Tell me then, do the sons recognize the Father and acknowledge him, or do they deny him, even as the people aforetime denied Jesus? How numerous at this time are the monks who have secluded themselves in their churches in my name, and who, when the appointed time came and we unveiled to them our beauty, failed to recognize me, notwithstanding that they call upon me at dawn and at eventide. And then he admonishes them to read the New Testament, read ye the Evangel, and that they will see with their own eyes in the New Testament that he is who he says he is. Then the guardian, now we're back to the guardian, explains what some of these Christian terms mean. Fallen stars of the firmament of Christendom. Thick clouds obscured the radiance of the true faith of God. These princes of the church that have failed to acknowledge the sovereignty of the King of Kings. The deluded ministers of the Son who have shunned and ignored the promised kingdom which the everlasting Father has brought down from heaven. He's saying, King of Kings, everlasting Father. These are Old Testament terms prophesizing the coming of the Messiah. And he says, this is Baha'u'llah, the fallen stars, the clouds that would obscure his coming. These are all discussed by Jesus, again, particularly in the book of John. The day of reckoning. These are experiencing in this day of reckoning a crisis, not indeed as critical as that which the Islamic sacerdotal order, the inveterate enemies of the faith, has had to face, but one which is no less widespread and significant. So he's saying Christianity is not going through as big a crisis as Islam is because of the coming of the faith, but is still going through a crisis that's equally widespread and significant because power has been seized from the rulers and the ecclesiastics. As long as they are away from the spirit of the faith. So we have only to look around us as we survey the fortunes of Christian ecclesiastical orders to appreciate the steady deterioration of their influence. And here's a list of all the things that were hammering Christianity, and particularly their clergy. The steady deterioration of their influence. Who cares what the Pope says? The decline of their power. There is no Christian leader who has any real power anymore, even within their churches. The damage to their prestige. Look at what's happening with all the scandals that are undermining any last vestiges of prestige and authority of many Christian denominations. The flouting of their authority, the dwindling of their congregations, the number of churches that are closing. Europe is just littered with empty church buildings that they don't know what to do with. And the United States is starting to be the same. The relaxation of their discipline. There are no rules left in most Christian churches. You can drink, carouse, do whatever you want. They don't care. If you show up on Sunday morning, they're happy. I mean, look at the Old and New Testament absolutely condemn homosexuality, yet we have churches doing gay marriages. I mean, there is no discipline. The restriction of their press, the timidity of their leaders. They're scared to speak up with any moral authority and exert any moral authority. The confusion in their ranks. Progressive confiscation of their properties. This is very important. The churches in many parts of the world became rich through the properties that they acquired through donations and other means over the centuries. And particularly when there were political revolutions, one of the outcomes is often the confiscation of church properties because they become too strong as landlords. The surrender of some of their most powerful strongholds and the extinction of other ancient and cherished institutions. So when you're looking at some of the mess that's happening with churches, pull this little list out and see where it falls. So when the Pope was addressed by Baha'u'llah, this process got started with the Pope losing all of his earthly power except for the tiny area of the Vatican. And this process has had increasing momentum, menacing the very basis on which the entire order is resting. Then he says, not only is this the Christianity falling due to the demise of the papacy, but this has been further aided by the forces which the communist movement has unloosed, reinforced by the political consequences of the last war, meaning World War I, accelerated by the excessive, the blind, the intolerant, and militant nationalism, which is now convulsing the nations, and stimulated by the rising tide of materialism, irreligion, and paganism. It's not only subverting ecclesiastical institutions, but leading to the rapid de-Christianization of the masses in many Christian countries. It is not unusual in the press now to see articles talking about post-Christian Europe or post-Christian America. And this rising tide of materialism, irreligion, and paganism, the word paganism is really interesting. Much of the environmental movement or the green movement harkens back to paganism, the worship of nature. And it actually, there are many aspects of the environmental movement that take on a religious tinge. There is also the resurgence of old pagan religions, such as Wiccas, Druids, people in Europe and the United States, all these people with crystals, and, other weird things that they're doing. This is paganism coming back. Anything in here, the communist movement, of course, believes that the state should be the focus of everyone and not spiritual ideals. And so the rise again of he'll talk more about this in the last sections, of the left, socialism, even here in the United States, has a strong anti-religious element to it. Any comments about this particularly weighty section? Or questions, or a lot to think. Go ahead.
It's so interesting how the Guardian, basically is predicting everything that's happening today.
Right, right. Why we have to study him.
Yeah.
He often remarked, they don't read what I write. So he's now going to give some examples. So the first example of what he's talking about is the extinction of the political power of the Pope. As the formerly he was the preeminent ruler in Christendom. Kings and rulers had to pay attention to him and obey him. Nobody obeys the Pope anymore, including many Catholics. A wave of anti-clericalism that swept over France, and he says with the collapse of the Napoleonic Empire, actually it started with the revolution in addition to the Napoleonic Empire, that went on for 100 years, secularizing the education in France and suppressing and dispersing religious orders in that country. Even though we like to throw in nuns when we're doing tourist pictures of France, the reality is the French want nothing to do with priests, nuns, and so forth. And here he's talking about what happened with the rise of communism, especially in the Soviet Union, which was an Orthodox Christian country. And he refers to it as swift and sudden rise of that religious irreligion, because communism is almost has the trappings of religion without God, but the state takes the place of God. That bold, conscious, and organized assault launched in Soviet Russia against the Greek Orthodox Church that precipitated the disestablishment of the state religion. This was also what led to the confiscation of the house of worship in Ishkabad. And he mentions that they took all these churches and so forth and turned them into museums and theaters and warehouses and so forth, and churches and monasteries and synagogues and mosques. And this, oops, sorry. The dismemberment of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, which happened instantly at the end of World War I, which was one of the few remaining bastions of the Roman Catholic Church being connected to the temporal power of the Pope. And the same thing happened with Spain, the divorce of the Spanish state from the Catholic Church, the overthrow of that monarchy, which had championed the Catholic Church. The nationalistic philosophy indirectly assaulted the front line of the Christian churches in non-Christian lands. So in many countries, people are no longer primarily showing allegiance to whatever church they belong to, whether it's a predominantly Christian country or not, but instead to the country itself. So they have divorced themselves from the religious identity in favor of a national identity. Heavy blows to Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian missions in Persia, Turkey, and the Far East. So all the people who, as part of the way of separating themselves from all the problems they saw in their societies in Persia, Turkey, and the Far East, by becoming involved with Christian missionary efforts, instead turned to nationalistic efforts to get rid of the problems of society. The Mexican Revolution, which seems to happen about every 10 years, resulted in the persecution of the Catholic Church in Mexico. And then he brings up modern paganism, unconcealed, aggressive, unrelenting, which has increased since its outbreak. The Nazis were really into a lot of pagan rituals and the occult, particularly the SS. This is a whole very interesting part of what the Germans got caught up in. But invading the citadel, sowing confusion in the hearts of the supporters of the Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and Lutheran churches in Austria, Poland, the Baltic, Scandinavian states, and more recently in Western Europe, the home and center of the most powerful hierarchies of Christendom. If you visit the Scandinavian countries, you will see paganism coming back everywhere. Sun worshipers, the summer solstice, let's go out and dance around the maypole. These are all pagan practices. And now he's turning to World War II. And pointing out that particularly the war in Europe is a war of Christian nations against Christian nations. Anglicans, that's the English, pitted against Lutherans, Catholics, Lutherans are the Germans, Catholics against the Greek Orthodox, Catholics against Catholics, and Protestants against Protestants in support of a so-called Christian civilization. It just shows the bankruptcy of those Christian institutions. And the Christian leaders, including the Pope, were powerless to stop the war. If the Pope had said to the Catholics in Germany and Austria, don't be involved with this war, they couldn't stop it. Take the war in Northern Ireland between the Catholics and the Protestants. The Archbishop of Canterbury and the Pope could in no way stop that conflict that's been going on for 100 years. It shows the inability of the religious communities to stop the warfare in Europe, shows the degree of subservience into which the once all-powerful institutions of the Christian faith have sunk. They are subservient to politicians and not the other way around. And these are striking reminders of the parallel state of decadence into which the hierarchies of its sister religion have fallen. So the sister religion means compared to Islam. So the Christianity is just as messed up as Islam is at this point in history. Christianity ignored the true Prince of Peace. And then he quotes Baha'u'llah's admonitions to Christians in general, not just to their hierarchy, saying, O concourse of Christians, we have on a previous occasion revealed ourselves unto you, and ye recognize me not. This is the day of God. The beloved one loveth not that ye be consumed with the fire of your desires. Were ye to be shut out as by a veil from him, this would be of no other reason than your own waywardness and ignorance. Make ye mention of me and know me not. Ye call upon me and are heedless of my revelation. Ye are shut out as by a veil from him. This would be for no other reason than your own waywardness and ignorance. So you generality of Christians, it's not just your leaders who have screwed up. Your own waywardness and ignorance is causing you to reject the one you're waiting for. O people of the gospel, they who were not in the kingdom have now entered it, whilst we behold you in this day tearing at the gate. So people who had never accepted Jesus are becoming Baha'is. Hindus and Buddhists and non-believers and people who had other kinds of religions are coming into the kingdom, and yet they are tearing at the gate. This tearing at the gate is another use of Jesus's words, because he says, he who stands at the door and knocks. There's a lot of imagery of Jesus about the gate, going into the gate. We behold you, O children of the kingdom, in the darkness. Come after me and I will make you become fishers of men, is what Jesus said. But in this day, Baha'u'llah says, come ye after me that we may make you to become the quickeners of mankind. Quickeners means to bring to life mankind. The quick or the alive in Old English. Any thoughts or comments so far? We verily, one of the things, of course, that's verily, that's very important in Christian theology is the idea that Jesus died for our sins. We verily have come for your sakes and have borne the misfortunes of the world for your salvation. Fear God, O followers of the Spirit, and walk not in the footsteps of every divine that hath gone astray. Open the doors of your hearts. He who is the Spirit verily standeth before them. Wherefore keep ye afar from him who hath purposed to draw you nigh unto a resplendent spot. We in truth have opened unto you the gates of the kingdom. Will ye bar the doors of your houses in my face? So he says the same thing he said about Islam. This is again the Guardian, that the clergy interpose themselves between their congregations and Christ, returned in the glory of the Father, Baha'u'llah. As the Christianity, as the Baha'i faith spreads throughout Christianity, let's see, and as its recruits from the garrisons which its spirit is assailing multiply and provoke a concerted and determined action in defense of the stronghold of Christian orthodoxy, and as the forces of nationalism, paganism, secularism, and racialism move jointly towards a climax, might we not expect that the decline in the power, the authority, and the prestige of these ecclesiastics will be accentuated and further demonstrate the truth and more fully unfold the implication of Baha'u'llah's pronouncement predicting the eclipse of the luminaries of the Church of Jesus Christ? From as the faith down through Jesus Christ is one long sentence. Hi, Shaheen.
Hello.
We're going through the section on Christianity.
Yes. Sorry I'm late. I'm actually in LA, Orange County, and I just got finished with this area's unit convention.
Ah, wonderful. Well, our unit convention was canceled by Hurricane Ian.
Oh, wow.
As were a number of others on the East Coast.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, what can we do? Fortunately, in our area, it wasn't too bad, but I think the unit below us was really devastated. So.
Well, I'm glad you guys are safe, though. That's really what matters.
Well, I think that there were certainly Baha'is in the areas that were badly hit, but we haven't gotten word yet about them. Our auxiliary board member for propagation is actually living further south in an area that got hit a little bit more than we did. And she is responsible for the area south of there. So we've been trying to reach out to her to find out what's going on with the Baha'is in the areas that were badly hit. But so far I haven't heard anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway.
I'm sorry, you know, the area that I'm in is pretty nice, very pleasant weather, and I got to keep in mind there's other places in the same, in the world, but in the United States, with even though it's the same season of the year, that has very different weather outcomes.
Right. Well, today was perfect weather in Florida, where we are. The day after a hurricane is usually wonderful.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the last couple of days have been beautiful.
I guess that's a similitude with humanity's tempest, right?
Right.
This
right.
tempest that's sweeping, it'll be pleasant after the tempest is over.
Right. Well, we were very busy because it looked, all the predictions had it coming straight at Tampa, but it came ashore where it came ashore 5 years ago in Naples area. And it was a Cat 4 again. So it was bad for them, but not so bad for us. Anyway, so we're back to talking about trying to get through this actually 3 sections tonight, dealing with Christianity. And we've just gone through all the different groups that were addressed among the Christian hierarchy not just the Pope, but the bishops and the monks and the priests, and then the generality of Christians themselves. And so now he's sort of summarizing all of this because we're getting toward the end of this book. And he says, devastating indeed has been the havoc wrought in the fortunes of Shia hierarchy in Persia, and the pitiable the lot reserved for its remnant, now groaning under the yoke of a civil authority it had for centuries scorned and dominated. Cataclysmic indeed has been the collapse of the most preeminent institution of Sunni Islam, that's the Caliphate, and irretrievable the downfall of its hierarchy in a country that had championed the cause of the self-styled vicar of the prophet of God. Steady and relentless is the process which has brought such destruction, shame, division, and weakness to the defenders of the strongholds of Christian ecclesiasticism, and black indeed are the clouds that darken its horizon. So this is a summary of these sections we've just gone through. Black indeed are the clouds that darken its horizon. Baha'u'llah stigmatized the clergy as constituting, the Muslim and Christian clergy as constituting the majority of his enemies, who failed as commanded by him to lay aside their pens and fling away their fancies. And he, as he himself testified, had they believed in him, would have brought about the conversion of the masses. Islam and Christianity have, it would be no exaggeration to say, entered the most critical phase of their history. So they've already had their heydays, their period where they brought wonders to the world, and now they are going through this critical phase in the history of these two religions where they're falling apart. But had they believed in him, they would have brought about the conversion of the masses. Now the Guardian, for the next several paragraphs, is going to remind us again that in talking about Christianity and Islam in the way in which he has, he is not in any way disparaging their founders. The cardinal truth of the faith of Baha'u'llah is the divine origin of all the prophets of God, including Jesus Christ and the apostle of God, the two greatest manifestations preceding the revelation of the Bab. It's interesting, he calls them the two greatest manifestations preceding the revelation of the Bab. This is an unreserved and unshakable belief of every follower of the Baha'i faith. And much of what we'll see in the next couple of slides is on this theme. So, Sarush, can you read this slide, please?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The faith standing identified with the name of Baha'u'llah disclaims any intention to belittle any of the prophets gone before him, to whittle down any of their teachings, to obscure however slightly the radiance of their revelations, to oust them from the hearts of their followers, to abrogate the fundamentals of their doctrines, to discard any of their revealed books, or to suppress the legitimate aspirations of their adherents. Repudiating the claim of any religion to be the final revelation of God to man, disclaiming finality for his own revelation, Baha'u'llah inculcates the basic principle of the relativity of religious truth, the continuity of divine revelation, the progressiveness of religious experience. His aim is to widen the basis of all revealed religions and to unravel the mysteries of their scriptures. He insists on the unqualified recognition of the unity of their purpose, restates the eternal verities they enshrine, coordinates their functions, distinguishes the essential and the authentic from the non-essential and spurious in their teachings, separates the God-given truths from the priest-prompted superstitions, and on this as a basis proclaims the possibility and even prophesies the inevitability of their unification and the consummation of their highest hopes.
Thank you. Any comments on this list or on this very weighty explanation of Shoghi Effendi on how we see progressive revelation?
I think for the next slide, well, for one thing, I had to read the definition of spurious. I think we defined this in high school, in our vocab, but I think it's really the opposite. I think it's essential, non-essential, authentic, spurious. So spurious was the opposite. And kind of what it's saying here reminds me of this other quote that a friend of mine put in a group chat, and it says that Baha'u'llah has not brought into existence a new religion to stand beside the present multiplicity of sectarian organizations. Rather, has he recast the whole conception of religion as the principal force impelling the development of the consciousness. And this is from the Universal House of Justice, One Common Faith, page 23. So I haven't seen that compilation myself, but that's what it says. So it reminded me of this, or seems to be similar,
Right, right. So I think as we try to understand progressive revelation, this list here from Shoghi Effendi is a very good place to start. One Common Faith, by the way, was a compilation that was put together at the time that the House of Justice addressed all the world's religious leaders and had a letter to that effect. It was about when you guys were little kids or not yet born. So, but it's good to go back and read that. A wonderful statement. In fact, I should go back and reread it. So we as Baha'is need to understand, what does it mean when he insists on the unqualified recognition of the unity of their purpose, restates the eternal verities they enshrine, coordinates their functions. I'm not quite sure what is meant by that statement. Distinguishes the essential and authentic from the non-essential and spurious in their teachings. Separates God-given truths from priest-prompted superstitions. And based on this, proclaims the possibility and even prophesizes the inevitability of their unification and the consummation of their highest hopes. So their highest hopes are to bring about the kingdom of God on earth, right? To bring about a spiritual world. But this is going to happen not by everyone becoming Lutheran or Catholic or Sunni Muslim or Presbyterian or whatever. It's going to be through their unification, which is something most of them can't even conceptualize at the moment. But he uses the word here, inevitability of their unification, which is extremely interesting and probably will not happen in my lifetime, maybe in your grandchildren's lifetimes. So we have to be careful that when we are trying to separate God-given truths from priest-prompted superstitions, that we rely on Baha'u'llah to do that and not on our own opinion. Any thoughts on this list?
Well, the last one is a great prompt, great point.
Yeah.
Inevitably of their unification. I think when Baha'u'llah said that the diversity of religions should cease,
Right.
when he was making a statement, when E.G. Brown was present. I think that too often when I hear little Baha'is say, they think that this idea of like, oh yeah, there'll be the Baha'i faith, and then there'll be people, other religions. They kind of think that I think they have this idea like the Baha'i faith will be the dominant religion, but among all the other religions. And it's like, no, that's not the point of
Right.
not the point of the coming of the twin manifestations of God. This is
Right.
completely different
Right.
era.
Right.
I think, yeah, it would be nice to have a little higher appreciation than just to think that, oh, this is it. That's not a high enough aspiration, really.
Right.
And it might scare some people because we're used to hearing this concept of unity and diversity. Well, here Baha'u'llah is specifically mentioning a lack of diversity in a particular avenue, but it's the religion of God. But here it is, it's his religion. We're not talking about some lack of diversity in culture or ideas or script or anything. Even then, though, with language, he says that if all of the world's languages were to be reduced down to one common script, and then, but you can also have, if you like, an auxiliary. You can have your particular native script, but you definitely need to learn an auxiliary language.
Right.
But the whole, there's 1,000 languages on planet Earth. We might think that that's interesting, but from the point of view of the manifestation of God, that is actually a hindrance and not an ideal.
Right. Right.
Regardless of the cultural influence that might spring out of it.
Right. Right. But we're basically moving to one culture as well. And let's face it, people the world over wear t-shirts, blue jeans, flip-flops, and tennis shoes, right? The whole world eats pizza. So we're gradually, the whole world likes NBA basketball, right? So we all like tacos, we all like sushi. Anywhere you go in the world, you're going to find those things anyway. So we're the difference in is becoming negligible. So, well, let's see if we can finish up this section for this evening. He makes it, he's again restating a lot of basics, and in the next couple of slides, he is stating, and I think this is particularly for the Western believers, that if you are a Baha'i, you accept Muhammad, the apostle of God, as a prophet, and we accept the Quran and his appointed successors, or any of his authentic teachings. We do not disparage them. And then it goes on to bring up that the faith grows out of Islam. The Bab was a lineal descendant of Imam Hussein. So to be a Baha'i is to accept Muhammad. And he uses then as an example how the Christian Queen of Romania, the granddaughter of the Russian Orthodox Tsar and the Anglican Queen Victoria, despite her Christianity, in her statement about the Baha'i faith, mentioned her acceptance of Muhammad. And here is part of Queen Marie's statement. Therefore, the prophets, Christ, Muhammad, Baha'u'llah, for man needs from time to time a voice upon earth to bring God. So Queen Marie is affirming her acceptance of Muhammad. So he's saying to the clergy of the Sunni and Shia that what greater proof do they need to see that the followers of Baha'u'llah are fully accepting the Prophet Muhammad, even if they come from non-Muslim backgrounds. What greater service do these divines expect us to render the cause of Islam? What greater evidence of our competence can they demand than that we should kindle in quarters so far beyond their reach the spark of an ardent and sincere conversion to the truth voiced by the apostle of God, and obtained from the pen of royalty this public, indeed historic confession of his God-given mission. As to the position of Christianity, we accept its divine origin unconditionally. The sonship and divinity of Jesus Christ are fearlessly asserted. We accept that the gospel is divinely inspired and fully recognize it as a sacred book. And now here's one that many of us who come from Protestant backgrounds might find difficult. The reality of the mystery of the immaculacy of the Virgin Mary is confessed. We accept that, in other words, that Jesus was born of a virgin. We do not dispute that. And the primacy of Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, is upheld and defended. That doesn't mean that we accept that the Pope, therefore, is the legitimate head of the Christian faith, but we do accept Peter as this legitimate successor of Christ. And then, of course, this wonderful statement about Jesus that is repeated many times, and I'm not going to have us go through that. Indeed, the essential prerequisites of admittance into the Baha'i fold of Jews, Zoroastrians, Hindus, Buddhists, and the followers of other ancient faiths, as well as of agnostics and even atheists, is the wholehearted and unqualified acceptance by them of all of the divine origin of both Islam and Christianity, of the prophetic functions of both Muhammad and Jesus Christ, of the legitimacy of the institution of the imamate. So as a Baha'i, I accept the imams, and of the primacy of St. Peter, the Prince of the Apostles. These are part of our incontrovertible principles, the bedrock of our belief. He also wants to mention that, yes, we have been talking about the world's religious leaders, particularly Christians and Muslims, who degraded, who did not accept the faith and chose to persecute it. But there are those among the clergy of those two faiths who are worthy of the position they occupy, and that a true Christian, a true Muslim clergyman who tries to truly walk in the ways of Jesus and Muhammad holds a special place in God's eyes. Those divines Baha'u'llah has affirmed who are truly adorned with the ornament of knowledge and of a goodly character are verily as a head to the body of the world and as eyes to the nations. The divine whose conduct is upright and the sage who is just are as the spirit unto the body of the world. Well is it with that divine whose head is attired with the crown of justice and whose temple is adorned with the ornament of equity.
That last part is part of a prayer also.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Attire my head with the crown of justice and my temple with the ornament of equity.
Okay, right. Okay, yes, those terms are used in prayer. We ask for those things. But he's saying that if you're a clergyman who meets those criteria, that you are in a very high position. I'm going fairly quickly here. Any more comments before we move on?
One
Sure.
more. This is interesting that it says the guidance of man hath at all times been and is dependent upon these blessed souls, which are those, ornaments of knowledge and good character, which is those divine. So in a sense, we don't have clergy in our, in our dispensation, but we do still have the learned, right? The
Right,
institutions of the learned and the elected.
right,
So there's still a place.
exactly. For people of good character with knowledge. Very good point. Great is the blessedness of that divine that hath not allowed knowledge to become a veil between him and the one who is the object of all knowledge, and who, when the self-subsisting appeared, hath turned with a beaming face toward him. He in truth is numbered with the learned. The inmates of paradise seek the blessing of his breath, and his lamp sheddeth its radiance over all who are in heaven and on earth. He verily is numbered with the inheritors of the prophets. He that beholdeth him hath verily beheld the true one, and he that turneth towards him hath verily turned towards God, the Almighty, the All-Wise. Think, friends, of all of the early believers who had the word mullah in front of their name, who were Muslim clergy, or mushtahads even in some cases. And also people like George Townsend, the hand of the cause, George Townsend, who was a British clergyman. Jack McCants, who was on our National Spiritual Assembly, had been a Methodist clergyman. There have been other clergy who have become Baha'is. I've known also of nuns, former nuns, and other people who were in monastic orders who have become Baha'is. He says these people in particular have a very high station. Any comments on this? It hath not allowed knowledge to become a veil. You can study theology to such a degree that you become an agnostic. Respect ye the divines amongst you. They know ye that they are the lamps of guidance betwixt earth and heaven. They that have no consideration for the position and merit of the divines amongst them have verily altered the bounty of God vouchsafed unto them. We only hurt ourselves when we don't pay attention to these spiritual people, right? That we have altered the bounty of God vouchsafed unto them when we have no consideration for the position and merit of the divines amongst ourselves, which I think also includes the institution of the learned. So now he is addressing another awful part of the judgment of God. Again, talking about World War II. Dear friends, I have in the preceding pages attempted to represent this world-afflicting ordeal that has laid its grip upon mankind as primarily a judgment of God pronounced against the peoples of the earth, who for a century have refused to recognize the one whose advent had been promised to all religions, and in whose faith all nations can alone and must eventually seek their true salvation. And he then summarizes that he's talked about how the trials of the founders, the herald of the faith, and the failure of the generality of mankind and its leaders to protest against the tribulations inflicted upon Baha'u'llah and the Bab, or to acknowledge their claims. I have moreover indicated that a direct and awful and inescapable responsibility rested on the sovereigns of the earth and the world's religious leaders, who in the days of the Bab and Baha'u'llah held within their grasp the reins of the absolute political and religious authority. So a big part of the responsibility for the mess that was World War II could be laid at their feet. Both kings and ecclesiastics have been and are still being subjected to the dire punishments which their sins of omission and commission have provoked. So it's not just what they did, it's what they didn't do that has brought about this punishment. Consequences that have flowed from these momentous and epoch-making utterances. And here's the great however. So Imam, can you read this, please?
This great retributive calamity for which the world's supreme leaders, both secular and religious, are to be regarded as primarily answerable, as testified by Baha'u'llah, should not, if we should correctly appraise it, be regarded solely as a punishment meted out by God to a world that has for 100 years persisted in its refusal to embrace the truth of the redemptive message proffered to it by the supreme messenger of God in this day.
Can you keep going?
It should be viewed also, though to a lesser degree, in the light of the divine retribution for the perversity of the human race in general, and casting itself adrift from those elementary principles which must at all times govern and can alone safeguard the life and progress of mankind. Humanity has at last, with increasing insistence, preferred, instead of acknowledging and adoring the Spirit of God as embodied in its religion this day, to worship those false idols, untruths and half-truths, which are obscuring its religions, corrupting its spiritual life, convulsing its political institutions, corroding its social fabric, and shattering its economic structure.
Any comments or thoughts?
Yeah.
We can't just blame it on the politicians and the clergy. The mess we're in is because of is a divine retribution for the perversity of the human race in general. He's going to talk some about false gods and some of these untruths and half-truths in his last sections. Shaheen, can you read this, please?
Yes. Not only have the peoples of the earth ignored, and some of them even assailed, a faith which is at once the essence, the promise, the reconciler, and the unifier of all religions, but they have drifted away from their own religions and set up on their subverted altars other gods, wholly alien not only to the spirit, but to the traditional forms of their ancient faiths.
Thank you. Any thoughts on this that Shaheen just, what is he talking about here?
Well, okay, so by, like it says in the tablet of Ahmad, whoso hath turned his back to his counsel, have turned, sorry, I can't paraphrase right now, but has basically turned his back to the messengers of the past, right?
Right.
So,
right.
and has showed pride before God. So here's the thing, though, which is interesting to me that I found in this paragraph is the last part, which is set up subverted altars, other gods, wholly alien. Okay, not only to the spirit, okay, that's which is more of a given, but to the traditional forms of their ancient faith. So I think that maybe partially that would mean that, to my understanding at least, that were these same people that claim a particular religion were to go back, let's say a Hindu were to go back to the time of, Krishna, they may not actually recognize him
Right,
or the early followers. They're gonna wonder, well, where's the offering or where's the whatever that they're supposed to be doing? Or same with the Buddhist. Where's this thing at the offering at the altar? Where's the little thing with the smoke and all the other stuff they do? And what about the Christians? They're gonna be like, oh, I heard that I'm not, they go back to something BC, AD, like let's say 28, well, during the time of Christ's active mission, and they're like, well, we heard somebody raise someone from the dead. Who is he? Where is he? We don't, and then they're going to find out that nobody was actually physically, possibly physically raised from the dead, or the multitude of fish that he ate wasn't actually, a bunch of fish coming out from a little area, but so everybody got a small morsel, but that small morsel was enough to satisfy them, physically and spiritually. That's all they needed. But here they expected a nice big fish for themselves, and they get it. Like, surely that's not the miracle man we're looking for. It
right.
could be a bunch. It could be anything of that sort.
Well, it shows that they not only, I mean, he's really so ahead of his time, because now this is so much more obvious. They're not only not turning to us, and in some cases, we're being ignored. The peoples of the earth ignored and even assailed the faith. But they are also turning away from their own religions and are turning away from traditional practices of their religions that may have had nothing to do with the teachings. But for example, look at your friends getting married. Where are they getting married? There were churches sitting empty, available, and yet they can't get the restaurant or the park they want on the day they want to get married. And increasingly, the person conducting the wedding is not a clergyman anymore. It's a friend, or someone who can read Khalil Gibran or whatever, some poems and whatever, and has the ability to sign a license. The fact that Christianity did away with cremation. It was a common practice in the Roman Empire. And because of Christian teachings, people turned away from cremation. Now they're back to it. So, I mean, even in these most basic things of marriage and death, they have moved away from the traditional forms of their ancient faiths. And the clergy aren't even paying attention that this is happening. Not only are they not going to church, but they aren't even doing the traditional forms that came out of their churches. I mean, the big three things that people want out of their religion are to deal with the arrival of a new baby, a marriage, and a death. And those are the times in their life where they want the traditional forms of religion. And they don't even want those anymore. I know so many people who have died and the family didn't even do a memorial service. They had the person cremated and that was it. No farewell. So, not to mention to lose the spirit of the faith of Jesus and Muhammad and Zoroaster and so forth. And this is written in the 1940s when this wasn't quite so evident. Now it is.
So the other gods are part of that is the venue for a marriage.
Right, exactly. They don't want to get married in a church. They want to get married on a beach, right?
Right.
So, Sarush, can you read this last quote? And then we'll end
Sure,
it.
can you hear me?
Sure.
The face of the world, Baha'u'llah laments, hath altered. The way of God and the religion of God have ceased to be of any worth in the eyes of men. The vitality of men's belief in God, he also has written, is dying out in every land. The corrosion of ungodliness is eating into the vitals of human society. Religion, he affirms, is verily the chief instrument for the establishment of order in the world and of tranquility amongst its peoples. The greater the decline of religion, the more grievous the waywardness of the ungodly. This cannot but lead in the end to chaos and confusion. And again, religion is a radiant light and an impregnable stronghold for the protection and welfare of the peoples of the world. As the body of man, he in another connection has written, needeth a garment to clothe it, so the body of mankind must needs be adorned with the mantle of justice and wisdom. Its robe is the revelation vouchsafed unto it by God.
So even though people being detached from their previous religions makes it a little easier for us to teach them the faith, because they don't have to, they don't have to detach from anything. We shouldn't be happy at the decline of religion in general, because the greater the decline of religion, the more grievous the waywardness of the ungodly. The corrosion of ungodliness is eating into the victuals of human society. And this is a very disturbing page or paragraph of selection of quotes from Baha'u'llah. Any thoughts or comments?
Every time I think that it can't get any worse, it gets worse.
Right. Right.
But I don't think that the worstness will be a long drag, because now I've kind of realized that, like, when you look at when you track the sun in the sky, there's really exactly, of the 365 days, there's only exactly one day where it's at its peak, where the day is the longest, and then there's exactly one day in whatever hemisphere you're at where the day is the shortest. It doesn't even overlap 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to have, I don't think, so this decline, as we know, is accelerating. I don't think once it's at its lowest ebb that it'll like plateau as a low ebb for a while and then finally start to get, move up. I think that it will have the lowest ebb, and that's it. That is the lowest now. But of course, I don't know how long that lowest ebb will last. I'm not saying it'll last for one day, but
Right.
whatever that on this, thousands of years grand scheme that we're looking at, that when we are at the lowest and in the lowest of the low, it's not going to be dragged out. It'll actually start to ascend, albeit slowly initially.
Well, I see, I've had this visual in my head of the Baha'is as this tiny group trying to build something while everything else is crashing down around us. But if we're not busy trying to build something, when everything is finally just rubble, there won't be any hope, anything else to turn to. And so that's why these little neighborhoods that the House is asking us to affect with the core activities and the 9-year plan, we're trying to slowly build up these little models, these little experimental groupings of peoples that will show a different way of living.
Well, if the Baha'is don't do it, then the people who are not Baha'is, they will look around and they will find out that there is the Baha'i faith, and of course they'll ask the House of Justice about it. So those people might be people who weren't actually directly taught by anyone.
Right.
So that's really another possibility for entry by troops, is like either those truths were taught by a human being, or they found it through an online article and then it went to, maybe not even an online article, but somehow they ran into some writing of Baha'u'llah, either in a library or who knows where. Then they, they maybe they gathered some friends on their own without any Baha'is involved and started studying it. And then they decided, oh, we should declare. And then they're like, well, there is a way to actually, like, there's the House of Justice. And they made, or national, they might light it right in there. I remember one time, I was in a remote place where people didn't know I was a Baha'i, and I didn't even know the conversation would go into the Baha'i faith at all. People were talking about where so-and-so's from, and they're in Chicago, and they, on their own thing, they had mentioned the Baha'i temple, and then they mentioned about how, like, they know Baha'is, some Baha'is, and they said great things about it. And I deliberately didn't tell them at that moment I was a Baha'i, because I was actually quite fascinated, and I really wanted to hear it to the end. And I was just like amazed that I never thought in my life that there would be people, like American people on a remote island, that they would be talking about the Baha'i. Like, there are people right now who are probably talking about Baha'is or the Baha'i faith, even though there's no Baha'i present. And I'm not talking, of course, about the clergy of Iran or anything like that. I'm talking about this daily conversation, maybe in a line or over pizza, or who knows.
Right.
But it is happening. It's out there.
Right. Anyway, well, anything else that anyone wants to bring up this evening?
This was very interesting. Thank you.
Well, I hope next week that we will finally conclude this wonderful book. So if you let everyone else know that next week will probably be the last session, we should be able to finish it up. But it also will, I think, be one of the most weighty sections, because of course he likes to put the big guns in the end.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy.
Well, you folks have a wonderful week, and I hope it will be productive at school and work, and that the weather will stay good everywhere, and not all the problems that we've had this last week. So anyway, all right. Well, good night, friends.
Thank you,
you.
Kathy.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.